Welcome to the Light Reading Podcast. My name is Phil Harvey. I'm the editor of Light Reading.
Hi, Vish Vishwanathan. I'm the Vice President of Wholesale and Satellite for the Americas at Telstra.
Vish, thanks so much for joining me today. I should tell everybody listening to this and watching this that we are at the Satellite 2022 conference in Washington, D.C. Satellite 2022 is the name of the conference, so it's really convenient that they had it this year. Otherwise, totally embarrassing.
Indeed.
But no, this is the satellite industry's big gathering spot every year. And one of the things I was here to find out specifically was how telcos are either, what areas they're competing with satellite carriers and what areas where they're complementary, where they're helping one another out and going into business together. And just this week, Telstra had a big announcement. Do you want to cover that?
Sure. So, again, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here with you. This is my first event at Satellite.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm really looking forward to having our meetings and such. So it is an interesting question that you asked, right? So much like the telco space, I think in the satellite space, telcos and satellite operators are competitors and it can coexist, so to speak.
Yeah.
And the news you just referenced is the press release that we just did this morning. We announced our partnership with them, extension of the partnership with OneWeb, where we're going to provide them ground stations in Australia. And we delivered the first of those this month, and they will go live within the next 3 months. And so we're pretty excited about that. It's a big story for us and a big deal for us. In any ways, if you're following football or baseball, it's one of those blockbuster deals that happens, right? So to us, it's as big as that.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It's interesting because the ground infrastructure that that telcos have, it's a huge strategic advantage, and satellite companies, of course, are always looking to penetrate new markets, especially now. Part of the big discussions that are happening here at this show are all about reach and market penetration. That's how certain companies are distinguishing themselves. Others are more toward cost and sort of kind of a different set of metrics. For OneWeb and some of the bigger operations that are growing quickly, it's all about market reach. Can you talk a little bit about how a company like Telstra helps them, get into new markets, and what markets are we specifically talking about in this deal?
Yeah, so the OneWeb requirements actually date back to a couple of years ago, and they had very exacting requirements, as we stated in our press release, on what they needed, where they needed it, and certain angles, and so on and so forth. So we take our strengths in the market in Australia. So this particular deal is about ground stations in different parts of Australia. So we've got one on the east coast of Australia, one on the northern side, and one in Western Australia. And the one that's gone live is in the Northern Australia piece in Darwin. And so it takes a lot of discussion and sleuthing, so to speak, in terms of the exact parcel of land, the exact line of sight, and so on and so forth. And takes a bit of research and investigation. And a lot of times we're very well positioned to be able to support all of that from a ground out perspective. And so that's what we did. We worked very closely with OneWeb and secured those pieces of land for them and built the ground infrastructure literally from ground up, no pun intended. And we installed the antennas, and now we will maintain those facilities for them going forward as well.
That's what's interesting about this too. Well, first of all, they call these ground stations teleports, or I guess that's the industry jargon. What do you know? What all goes into putting one of those together? I mean, obviously, like you said, location is primary. Line of sight is huge. Obviously, you have to have bandwidth going to it. You have to have a way to get fiber to it, or maybe fiber's already existing there. I imagine there's power, cooling, and other constraints.
Yeah, so there's multiple facets to it, to your point, and that's where telcos are very well positioned, right? So you're talking about land and infrastructure, installing the antennas, and you're talking about fiber to the site. If it doesn't exist, we have to dig in and get those fibers in there. Talks about data center connectivity, talk about IP connectivity, talk about subsea connectivity
Right.
into other parts of the world. So there's a lot that goes in there that we're just very well positioned to be able to support and make sense, right? And then there's a whole regulatory and government angle that we've just got all of that already taken care of, right?
Yeah, right.
We've got that addressed, and so it becomes easier for us to operate in that environment and be able to support this stuff. We've got, as you may know, we've got a part of Telstra that's called Infraco that is in Australia that is literally that fiber arm to us, right? And they're either they've deployed fiber to many of these sites or in the process of deploying fiber. So we're, again, very well positioned from that standpoint. And that's where this field becomes strategically important.
Yeah, and as you mentioned too, it's got a services component, it's got a maintenance component. So this isn't just a thing where it's like, hey, build this quickly and then let's move on.
Right.
It's like, no, this is the initial deal is 10 years, but I mean, obviously this is a long-term looking thing when you're talking about maintaining these ground stations.
Indeed. Yeah, so the initial deal, to your point, is 10 years and there's options to extend. We're also talking between the two of us to extend our capabilities beyond Australia to other parts of Asia as well. Given that we've got a footprint that we can easily tap into. So we're looking at other parts of Australia as well as Asia where we can do similar projects with OneWeb.
Another, we'll get into one more point about how Telstra's helping the satellite companies, and then we'll wrap up. But because I know you've got other people to talk to here, the global network services part of Telstra, when you're talking about helping content providers, reach new markets.
Right.
Can you give me a little bit of information on what that business is looking like and what it's been up to lately, and how maybe it's increased in importance, especially as the world is moving to streaming to more devices and trying, all of these content providers are desperate to take advantage of the technology and not just be in their localized thing, but to find their fans, so to speak, all over the world.
Yeah, so this is another interesting part of Telstra, right? So given our subsea assets, so we've got over 250,000 miles of subsea fiber already in the ground. We're heavily investing in that as part of our T25 strategy to expand that and expand our presence in other markets. The broadcast side of our business is growing incredibly strongly as well. And that GMN network, the global media network, rides on top of the subsea fiber and the terrestrial networks that we have. So that's been a growing piece of our market as well, in addition to everything else we're doing. So it's interesting times to be at Telstra.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where the telcos sort of feel. I think a lot of carriers were. Can tend to be upset with streaming companies about all this, but one obvious component of that on the wholesale side is that these streaming companies are generating terabits of data, hours of content, and it all has to reach places all over the place, anywhere there's a phone. So it seems like that would be a good business to be in.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, the reality is most of these hyperscalers and content customers are self-serving in many ways, but they also need the likes of Telstra to be able to get them to places. And that's where, the diverse subsea assets that we have and the terrestrial network down in Australia and Asia that we have comes in pretty handy for us.
All right, fantastic. Well, hey, Vish, thanks so much for making some time for us, and congrats on your first satellite conference. I hope it goes well for you.
Yeah, super excited, and on the heels of the OneWeb announcement, it's absolutely exciting. Thanks,
right.
Phil.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.